Thank you for having me here. I am really excited about this. I have worked with the different groups of folks in the room, but never all at the same time. So it's been interesting for me to wrap my brain a little bit around maybe what I could offer you today that's a little less fad-based, a little less that pendulum that swings in education, and maybe something a bit more principle-based that will last and that might make some impact for success with you and the way that you interact with your students. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. Whenever I present, I always talk about math being figure-outable, so I just gave away that I'm math. However, today we're not going to do that. Today I'm going to talk a little bit more about teaching, and I'm going to wonder if teaching is figure-outable, or if there are some things that we can do in our teacher-student interactions that can help us all be a little bit more successful in the things that we're trying to do and still maintain that teacher heart that we have, which I think is so important. So I'm going to talk about teacher-student interactions, and I'm going to show you a teacher friend of mine interacting with some of her students. And I want to get at today some of the things that could help us ferret out some of the maybe preconceived notions that we have as we deal with our students that could potentially interact in ways that we actually don't want to. So what are the things that we do that we can build on for success and make even more strong in the way that we interact with students? And what might be some of the things that we would be interested to tweak? So I want to have some conversations today that would maybe have something to do with the way that a teacher might interact. Now, you might have noticed that Abby, who's the teacher here in these slides, is always kneeling. It's a little bit because we were filming, and you kind of want to have a good shot of not. She does stand at times, so I did want to make sure that it's not all about kneeling. I'm not going to be making you hit the floor. Isn't that sweet? It's a sweet shot. So as we talk about interactions today, I want to begin with Brene Brown, who's from Houston. Yes? So she teaches at the University of Houston. Some of you may be familiar with her work. She gave a TED Talk that's actually one of the top 5 watched TED Talks ever. I actually checked on that to make sure that it was still true, and it is. And her TED Talk was on vulnerability, so I'm seeing some folks nod their heads. If you have not yet watched this TED Talk, it's fairly short. I would highly recommend that you take a look at Brene Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability, and then the one that she did after that's also pretty good. She also has some interesting books out. One of the things that she talks about is in any of our work, what does it mean for us to be authentic? And authentic in a way that is boundaried and vulnerable. And so she says vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Though to many of us it may not. That was me, not her. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. That's an interesting thing for us to think about, I think, especially with some of the things that are happening in our society today. What does it mean for us as teachers to be able to be authentic and vulnerable? Because none of us want to be weak. That's not a desirable. So what does it mean for vulnerability to be truth and feel like courage? What I really want to focus on a little is some of the things that she talks about in her book called Daring Greatly. So she said, when I asked people why there was such a lack of feedback in their organizations and schools, so she works in organizations and schools. So we're going to be talking about teacher-student interactions today, but on a level of the school or the organization level, what were the 2 major issues? Number 1, we're not comfortable with hard conversations. Anybody agree, disagree? And 2, we don't know how to give and receive feedback in a way that moves people and processes forward. We all in this room today are very interested in moving people and processes forward. Both, right? Like in a big way, we're interested in moving people forward, those students that we just talked about that we all share, but we're also interested in moving processes forward to put in place some things that we can have students who are more college ready. So that's interesting though, when she says we don't want to have students that have to take the non-credit classes, but some of you teach those. So maybe I don't know, do you have slight interest in keeping those courses alive? Okay, just there's a little attempt at humor. So if we're interested in moving both people and processes forward, these 2 major issues might be something that we can talk a little bit about today. I want to talk about being comfortable with the hard conversations. So she's a teacher, right? So she teaches at the University of Houston. And in her teaching, she says, if you are comfortable, then I'm not doing my job. I realize I'm not exactly quoting. I'm not teaching and you're not learning. It's going to get uncomfortable in here, and that's okay. It's normal. And it's part of the process. So that's an interesting thought. she says we're not comfortable with hard conversations, and sometimes we get tempted to want to make it like we should be comfortable with this hard conversation. Or should we just normalize that discomfort? So this is her attempt to say, when I begin a class, I literally tell my students, it's going to get uncomfortable in here. That's normal and part of the process. Let me normalize for you that I may push a little bit in here and you may get a little uncomfortable. That is a fine line to walk. I think we all as educators appreciate the fact that there have been times where we maybe pushed a little too hard, or we've been a little bit too vulnerable, or we've been, I could be too vulnerable, maybe a little bit too not boundaried with our vulnerability. That we've stepped a little bit more across that line than we wish we had. Or on the other side, that we've erred on the side of being a little too cold or too distant or not involved enough. And to walk that line, I think, is sort of a fine line. I'm also going to quote a math gal, Kathy Fosno, who's a math expert, who says that she wants to intentionally invite disequilibrium into her classrooms. I think those two sort of go along together. But what does that mean? Like, does that mean that we're mean? That we're ugly? That we're rude and ornery? So she says, I believe that feedback thrives in cultures where the goal is not getting comfortable with hard conversations, but normalizing the discomfort. If leaders expect real learning, critical thinking, and change, then discomfort should be normalized. That's a little bit odd. I don't know that we do that a lot in our society. That we say to ourselves, today in class, it's going to get a little uncomfortable, and I'm going to try to normalize that so that students will lean into the discomfort, rather than I'm going to try to make today as not, it could potentially be uncomfortable, and so instead of that, I'm going to tiptoe around and I'm going to do all sorts of things to not offend. What would it be like, we're not intending to offend, but what would it be like to know that it's going to be uncomfortable and lean into that in a boundaried sort of way? We believe growth and learning are uncomfortable, so it's going to happen here. You're going to feel that way. We want you to know it's normal and it's an expectation here. You're not alone, and we ask that you stay open and lean into it.